No
Jim, thank
problem.
you. Thank you. You're looking good too from Arkansas, I'll tell you. You're looking
Oh,
good.
thank you. I'm feeling great up here.
Don't say that. Okay, let's get started. A couple things, because we're going to have kind of interaction. Greg is muted right now. Greg Lucas?
Yeah, I'm
There you
unmuted.
go. All right. Because we're going to have some interaction with Joe Gallagher here in a few minutes, I'd like us not to be muted so that we can talk to Joe, but we don't want any background information of dogs barking or whatever we can. So I ask for your permission to try to keep the background noise to a very minimum roar.
No, I'm especially thrilled that Larry Miggins is on tonight.
Yes,
because
yes. My
That's
second
important.
announcement is that the Astros will be on at 8 o'clock. And I'm asking that nobody mention the score on our Zoom broadcast because there are a number of people who are recording the game. So they don't want to know what the score is. So if you kind of hold off on that, you can look at it or whatever, but as far as announcing.
Well, what's
Also-
it worth to you?
Sir?
What's it worth to you?
Also,
I can
speaking
be-
of work,
I can be
I have
Thinking at the end about her family.
I've got unfortunately, a couple of emails have come out to some of you asking for money from me. They're all bogus.
We have a constitution we're supposed to be defending.
Uh-oh, somebody's got the TV on. We've got to turn it off, whoever it is.
If
David?
Justice Scalia had said something like that,
Thank you.
Sorry, you're about to see.
We have not asked anybody for any money, so disregard anything like that.
I want mine back then, Bob.
Yeah, I'll send it back to you with interest, Mike, with interest.
Just another one of those scams for white-haired people. They got a lot of them out there.
Yeah. Also, we're getting ready. I think Tony's on. If he's not, he will be shortly. We're getting ready for our second edition of the Houston Baseball Shooting Star Express. And we have a deadline of October 15th, which will be before our next meeting, which is October 20th. So if any of you have any comments or articles or opinions, favorite players, favorite baseball experiences, we ask that you send those to us in the next 3 weeks so that we can include them in the next edition. We've already had several people who volunteered to write comments, including today, Fred Rogers is going to write something up on all-time baseball umpire Joe West, who could break the all-time record if he gets to umpire the World Series. But anyway, this is your opportunity to express your opinion, pro and con, about what's going on within baseball or within your baseball experience or whatever. So we welcome your articles and photographs and what have you. So please keep that in mind. So
I sent Bob a note. I'm skipping this time. I got too many cons. I'll just sound like a grumpy old man about the current state in baseball. So I'm going to abstain for next month until I get pumped up and have something positive.
Okay.
I'll point out too that we've got some good long articles, so the shorter the better. Okay.
Hey, Bob, that being said, not only for the newsletter perhaps, but also something I'd like to do fun tonight. I created a couple of poll questions that I would like to ask the entire group. And hopefully we can use the format we have here. They're built into the call tonight. So
Perfect.
I have 4 questions. One of them I had to change because of news that came out this week. I imagine you can figure that one out. So I'd like to do that before everybody leaves.
Okay. Well, we will have a trivia contest too at some point, and we have a video which we may or may not get to depending upon Mr. Gallagher and his presentation. So Jim, you have the honors. You want to introduce our guest speaker?
Okay, so we've got on tap tonight 90-year-old Joe Gallagher. And if you could imagine the world's best baseball speaker, it would be someone that had a lot of interaction with ball players from Mickey Mantle's rookie year up to, the 1980s, let's say, the glory years. And that's just so happens that's who our speaker is tonight. And I first met Joe when I was looking for New York Yankee Joe Gallagher that lived in Houston, and I couldn't find him. I knew he was widowed, and the only Joe Gallagher in the phone book was a Joe and Carol Gallagher. So I knew that wasn't my guy, but I called him anyway. And Joe said, "Sure, I know the ball player."
Mickey Herskowitz? I think it's Mickey Herskowitz.
What is it?
Yeah. He's great.
Tim,
You ready?
we lost you.
You here?
Come on, just give me the guy's address. But he didn't want, some strange guy looking up his friends. So,
Would you want me to get you something to drink?
Yes.
Okay.
could you get me something too?
Thank you.
So Joe and I met for lunch one day in Houston, and we got to be really, really good friends. We went to the baseball writers' dinner a couple of times together, and then he moved to Louisville, so I haven't seen him in a long time. But Joe did a Zoom meeting for the Arkansas chapter about a month ago, and we didn't let him hang up until 3 hours after he started talking.
Oh,
10 o'clock, it was past his bedtime, but we wouldn't let him go because he had so many good stories. And then I talked to him last week, and he told me some more stories that I'd never heard before that were great. So without further ado, here he is, live from Austin, Texas, Joe Gallagher.
Okay, Jim. But these are the age of fake news. That was a little joke. But I'm delighted to be joining you guys. I lived in Houston for 16 years and was at the Astros games as many times as I could be, and always enjoyed it, even if I didn't root for the Astros. But I did a lot too, and looking at the pictures here, I have to say that Greg Lucas, you look 25 years younger. I'm just amazed.
I appreciate it.
You just want a free book, that's all.
But the one thing I've been thinking about this all week, and I'm delighted that Larry Miggins is part of the program tonight, because I played against Larry in high school. He was a superstar for Fordham Prep. And I played for Manhattan Prep. And as some of you may know, the rivalry between Fordham and Manhattan, it's kind of like the Aggies and the Longhorns. It's kind of intense.
This is Larry Miggins, and I remember playing against him.
There was one game that we played at Manhattan Prep at Fordham Prep in the Fordham Prep field. And Larry hit 2 home runs that were so far, I think they're still in orbit. There was no question. I mean, I was playing first base for Manhattan Prep. I wanted to ask for his autograph as he ran at first base, but I didn't. And when I moved to Houston, somehow I got called for jury duty, and along with maybe 60 or 80 other people, I was sitting in a room waiting to be. I might be called, and the deputy who was in charge of us and spoke in a very nice way, talked about baseball, was Larry Miggins. I hadn't seen him since high school days, but it was amazing, and I did my best to kind of stir up a little bit of Bronx friendship there, and I'm not sure that it ever worked, but I did have occasional contact with him and took part in some of the Irish ceremonies that he had, and I just delighted to see Larry here, because Larry was really a superstar, and I think if it hadn't been for the war years, which affected a lot of people, but it probably affected him more than he realized, and he didn't have the major league career that we expected he would have. But he did have a major league career. And one of the stories I love one of Larry's friends at Fordham Prep was Vin Scully,
Once-
who we all know about. And Vin Scully tells the story about he had told Larry when they were in school that in a few years he would be playing in the major leagues, and he said, I'll be announcing in the major leagues. And you'll come up to bat, and I'll call if you'll hit a home run, and I'll call it your first home run. And the Cardinals, I guess, were hosting the Dodgers. And Larry's first at bat, he hit a home run, and Vin Scully was calling it. And Scully says he cried. It was such an emotional thing. And Larry, I hope I'm accurate on that account.
It was real well. I remember it very well. Gee. Ben Scully's a dear friend of mine. I hope he wasn't burned up in the fires out there in California.
It was okay. Well, whatever. The people were right. You and Scully were the two main, and because Scully is a great announcer and a great person, and in my book, so are you.
Thank you.
So anyway, I'm here to. I love to talk baseball, but I'm not sure where to begin, except that maybe in 1965 I was producing the New York Mets TV, and I had the privilege and the fun of working with three great baseball announcers: Lindsey Nelson, Bob Murphy, and Ralph Kiner. And the season opened. The Astros opened at home against the Phillies. The Mets were in San Francisco for a weekend series. And then we flew to Houston. And the team stayed at one of the new hotels downtown. But Lindsay and I had kind of come up with the idea that in certain cities, we could stay at our own hotel. And it didn't matter to the team or to anybody as long as people knew where to get in touch with us. So I had made a contact at the Shamrock, and we stayed at the Shamrock. We got to the Shamrock on Sunday night, and the place was packed from the opening of the Dome. There were sports writers, and I'm sure fans from all over the country were there. And they said they didn't have our rooms. The reservations weren't intact. Fortunately, Lindsay was there, and Nicky Hilton was around the lobby, and he recognized Lindsay. And Lindsay told him our dilemma, and he said, well, the presidential suite hasn't been booked, so the president probably will not be here. So we'll let you guys have the presidential suite. And so the presidential suite was, a bedroom on either side of an enormous living room. So on Monday night, there was no games, we had a little reception with sports writers from all over the country. People like Red Smith from New York and Jim Murray from LA and other sports writers from Chicago. They had to cover the opening of the Astrodome. So we had ourselves a nice party. But the memorable thing was on the Monday, we get up, had our breakfast, and decided we should go and look at the Astrodome. Monday being an open day. Walking into that building was so phenomenal. I mean, it was awesome. Just to look and see that baseball field covered with a glass roof. And I suddenly got the inspiration that there was a fixture up at the apex of the dome, which somebody explained was a gondola put there in case for photographers to take pictures from. So I said to myself, I don't want to come back here the next time we play it in Houston and find out that St. Louis or Chicago or somebody else had done a broadcast from the gondola. So I asked the assistant, and the word got to Tal Smith that we wanted to do a broadcast from there, and Tal gave his approval. And I didn't know that the gondola could be lowered. It was like on an elevator shaft. So I selected Ralph Kiner to be the announcer who went up in the gondola. And Ralph says, no way, I'm not going up there. So I think, well, there's an idea that just won't happen. And Lindsey Nelson, being the creative pro that he was, he said, I'll do it. He said, I'll go up. he said on one condition, he said you get them to lower the gondola. And that was first I knew that it could be lowered. And so I asked about that, and Tal said, sure, we'll do it. It meant changing the pregame batting schedule in the field practice and so forth. And they moved everything up an hour so the gondola could be lowered, and it was. And Lindsay and a fellow named Joel Nixon, who was our executive producer, climbed in, and it went up to 250 feet above second base. Lindsay left pens and anything loose on the downstairs. He didn't take it with him because if it had fallen, by the time at 250 feet, it could have hurt somebody. And so we had a phenomenal broadcast there. Murph and Kiner were in the booth, carried the broadcast, but Lindsay did about 2 innings of play-by-play from way up in the sky. In the pregame lineup exchange, Casey Stengel, they were going over the ground rules and so forth, and Tom Gorman was telling us later that all of a sudden Casey said, "How about my announcer?" And they didn't know about Lindsay being up there. And they looked at him, "What do you mean you're an announcer?" And he said Casey was always coming up with something strange. And Casey pointed up, he said, my announcer's a ground rule. He said, an announcer has never been a ground rule before, and it's my announcer. So Lindsay Nelson was a ground rule. And we had a very interesting broadcast. He did a lot of commentary, tried to do play-by-play. It was pretty tough because he couldn't tell whether a pitch was high or low. He could tell whether it was on the inside of the plate or the outside and so forth. But it was just something different. And I remember Bob Hope and Phil Harris were at the game, and they were sitting in a box down next to the Astros dugout. And when the game was over, Phil Harris said, "Let's go up to the judges' suite and have a drink." And Bob Hope said, "I'm not leaving till Lindsay comes down." And he didn't. It was just a unique event, a unique moment. And it was something that it was special to do. And we try to do things a little bit different. We knew that we didn't have a team that was going to win a lot of games, and they didn't. And the Astros were pretty much in the same boat.
Was there a bathroom in the gondola?
I'm sorry?
I said, was there a bathroom up there?
Not that I'm aware of. I think we might have had a backup plan just in case, but those are the things you have to think about. And with the new ballparks, that's not a concern because you usually have bathrooms in all of the press boxes. But when you think back to the Polo Grounds and Wrigley Field and Comiskey Park and the old Comiskey Park and some of the older ballparks, that was one of Rule A. Red Barber mentioned this in his book on the rhubarb patch, was that one of the rules for a broadcast is to make sure you go to the bathroom before the game starts. Nowadays, with all the new ballparks, I don't think that's that much of a concern. But at any rate,
Great story.
Yeah, Larry, let me ask Larry if he has any comments. Larry, you have any comments you want to make? Larry Miggins?
I do indeed. I've had a checkered career, most unusual, and I wonder how many people played 8 years of pro baseball, which I did, 1 year in the big leagues. But when I left baseball, I had 2 college degrees, all because I went to school in the off season. When I was leaving Houston in 1949, after a year here, had a good year, hit 29 home runs, I think, and 101 RBIs. But anyway, I met Father Vincent Guinan, who was the president of St. Thomas University, the founding president. And I told him I always wanted the college degree. He said, if you really mean that, come back and see me. I was back the next day, and I got enrolled about 10 days late in that semester. It was the fall of '49. Ordinarily, you wouldn't get into school because you were just too late. But I got 15 hours credit that semester. I took 15 hours for the next semester when I was still playing ball. In fact, I played ball at Columbus, Ohio, in AAA, had a good year. So I picked up another 15 hours. He worked it out where I could work through some priests he had met that acquainted with me. They handle the books and so forth. So in 1952, I got a degree in Thomas University. Well, around at the ballpark, I quit baseball, entertaining customers, because I was selling aluminum windows at the time, and I met Billy Costa there. Billy and I had played together for 3 years. And Billy had an old friend of his sitting in front of him with a slouch-on hat. And I met him. His name was B. Hattie. He happened to be the chief judge of the Southern District of Texas, federal judge.
Yeah.
So anyway, he called me up about a week later, said, I want to see you. He said, I got a job for you. I said, what is it? He said, we got an opening here in the Federal Probation and Parole Office, and I want you to take this job. I looked it over. He said, go on upstairs and get acquainted with those people up there, which I did. Liked the idea. Took the job, spent 10 years there. I was chief in 3 years. He made me the chief of the Southern District of Texas, go to 21 counties. And then I had to retire because I had to close. It was an automatic retirement at 55. Then on the day I retired from the feds, I walked over to the city hall and talked to my friend Jim McCann, who was mayor, and he said, where do you want to work? It's a fact. So anyway, I said, well, I worked in the courses in the last 10 years. Maybe I can help you. Call over to the chief judge over here. So I called the chief judge over. He said, you got a new assistant. That's how it worked. I spent 10 years with the city of Houston. The fellow mentioned earlier, I did part of the job I did was working with the jury. Anyway, I got a degree from St. Thomas University. I got a degree from Houston State, a master's degree in corrections. And I took that. It just fell into me. How many people to schools and get graduate degrees? 8 years of baseball. I don't know anybody.
That's great. That's
Yeah.
great.
I mean,
That's cool.
Who is the
Very
man
nice.
who knows me? Who's the man who I want to meet him? Where is he? I can't. The one who talked about me earlier. Who is he?
Joe Gallagher.
Joe Gallagher. Joe Gallagher.
Oh, Gallagher.
Yeah.
I can't see you in these pictures.
Oh, you
Oh,
got
Gallagher. Joe, are you going to be at the next meeting? If you are, look me up. I'd like to be.
How many pictures you got up there, Larry? 25 about?
I have
Is
a
that
lot of
to me?
decent pictures. You'd love it.
I didn't get it.
Let's get back to Joe. Joe, go ahead. Joe Gallagher.
Okay, yeah, okay.
Thank you very much. God bless you. By the way, my wife and I had 12 children. That would be a record. Got them all through college years ago. I couldn't do it today, but when they came along, we got them all through college. We got one free ride. One guy went to the Naval Academy up in
Well, one thing I'm wondering with Larry Miggins is, I read most of the book that you read, that you wrote, Larry, and one of the things that I'm always wondering about was the time when you changed the call for the umpires, and I guess it was in an important game.
Was, yeah.
And an umpire had signaled the ground rule double, but the ball had gone into the stands.
It's a great story. Great story.
And I think that's so phenomenal that even happened, that the umpires would think to ask
Probably
you
never
about that.
happened. I was playing left field, Columbus, and I was playing in the game after playoffs to get to the World Series. 1-1. Each team had won one game. We're in Columbus, and this is the third game, and a fella hit a shot down the line. The line in Columbus was 380 feet. That's out of the Astrodome, because that's only 340. It's 40 feet beyond the Astrodome. Hit 2 balls there all year. I had 2 to right field, 2 to left on the road. But anyway, this fella hit a ball down the line, and I ran over and jumped up. It was about 4 inches on my glove, and I missed it. It was going down. I turned around, and the ball hit a fence, or hit the chair or something, and bounced back right in my hands. Grabbed it and fired it at second base. Guy slides in. He's controls safe from the umpire. He's safe for the double. Well, then the argument started because everybody in the park knew it was a home run except the umpire. So they're going back and forth. The whole Minneapolis team come out of the dugout and chase the umpire from third base to first base and back again. It was hilarious. Myself and what's his name?
Salihimus.
No, Walker.
Harry.
Harry Walker. Harry Walker was the center out left field. We were talking about it. First thing you know, the umpire starts walking onto left field. And I heard from Sally Hemus was wrong, listening and everything. And he's giving signs behind the umpire. Nothing, don't say anything. And he come out. And the first thing he said to kind of disarm me, Larry, they tell me you're an honest man. So I said, he said, I couldn't, I lost the ball. Hit a fly or a ground ball, or call it a ground double. He said, well, I said, well, if I had a ball that far, I'd want a home run. Yes, it was a home run. But for now, for God's sake, you do the umpire and keep me out. So they got 2 runs out of that call, and they beat us that. So, but the next 2 times we won. And we got to the World Series. We Baltimore Series in 7 games, and won the series. It was great. But I was at the Astrodome. 90 years later, I went to the ball game, and I saw my friend the umpire. I forget his name right now. Batting practice. And I said, well, I go down and talk. I walked down. And I got about 3 or 4 chairs away, and he turned around. He said, Larry Miggins. Holy, he ran up and grabbed me, and hugged me, and said, man, do you remember the time you called on home run for me back in 1950? I said, I'll never forget it. He said, well, let me tell you, I've told that story all over the banquet circuit of New England. So everybody heard about it and everybody loved it. That's probably never been done before. That was the story. Did you get it? You got it. That's the famous story. Of me and Paul third strike. Yeah. Well, it wasn't third strike, it was a home run.
Hey, Joe. So you got to understand, this is a pretty big thrill for us to have Larry participating as much as he is tonight. So it's thrilled to have him pass on his stories and your stories.
May I ask Joe a question about his time here in Houston?
Well, my time?
Yeah, well, I want to ask you a specific question. You used to work a little bit freelance stuff for, I think it was HSE and maybe Prime Sports, and I know you did some football games, and you got to work with the late Ed Biles, who I had a chance to work with too, because I know you did some high school games with him. Ed was a very great analyst for all of his great coaching careers, but I seem to remember a story going around where he also had to be a peacemaker between you and a particular director after a high school game. Can you tell me anything about that story?
No, I coached one high school team. That was the American Legion.
No, this was for
team,
Joe.
and we lost.
This was for Joe, Larry. My question was for Joe.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
Yeah.
A peacemaker after one of the high school games?
Yeah, Ed had to kind of, you and the guy, I guess, who was directing had some disagreements.
Is that right?
No, not you. This is Joe, I'm asking. Do you remember the story at all?
Actually, I don't. Although I did occasionally disagree with the director, and there was one occasion on a game that we had in, I think it was a playoff game. It played in Waco at Viola Stadium.
Yeah.
And I used to research and do graphics, and the visiting team, or one of the teams, was from one of the towns in the northeast part of the state. And they had made a point of, it had something to do with integration. I forget the details, but they didn't distinguish between black and white. Everybody was the same, and I made up wrote out a graphic, words for a graphic, kind of pointing that out. To me it was a good example of how we can all get along together. And the fellow who was charged with typing the graphics didn't type it because he didn't want to get into that kind of stuff. And I wasn't looking to make an issue out of it. It was just a point of, this is how people can get along, and how good teams, baseball, football, basketball, whatever, can get along by just recognizing each other as equals. And I guess I got a little bit upset over the fact that as producer, you think you're in charge of the program, but in that case, I wasn't.
Yeah,
and that may have been the case.
I think it was, because I'm told that Ed had to kind of get in there and kind of, Ed Biles, to kind of calm everything down at the end of the game, because Ed was a really great guy anyway. And of course,
Ed was super.
We lost him about less than a year ago, I think. And
I didn't know that.
I thought he was the best analyst I worked for on football, because he could predict plays just by, like a good football coach. When they came up to the line of scrimmage, he knew what they were going to do. And he was just excellent at that. And so he was a great guy and a nice guy. And I know you had worked with him too.
Oh, I used to love working with Ed, because he was so honest. And if he disagreed with it, he'd let you know, but he did it in a nice way.
Yep, he did.
And you wouldn't want to disagree with him. I always asked his opinion, and kind of went with what he said. But
that brings up another point I'll ask you, because of all your years doing a lot of producing. I guess starting with the Yankees and radio over there, and then ending up with the Mets and all that sort of stuff. You had to deal with a lot of different egos. But most of the guys that I read about that you dealt with in New York weren't too bad in that department. Their egos were pretty much under control. There may have been some exceptions, but how did you do that as a producer? Deal with egos?
I used to listen to them, but I think I was very fortunate in dealing with producing the New York Mets games. And we started in '62 with Lindsey Nelson and Bob Murphy and Ralph Kiner. And when Lindsey was hired, he was hired as the number one announcer. But he didn't want to be number one. He wanted all three of them to be the same. And he made that very clear in our meetings. So we had a lot of meetings during spring training. We talked about style of broadcasting, style of coverage, and so forth. And I think we were all realistic enough to know that it wasn't going to be a winning season. And I don't know how people in Houston felt about the Colt 45s, but in our meetings, we knew that it'd be a tough season. And but Lindsay made it very clear that he wanted Bob Murphy and him to be equal, especially in terms of doing certain innings. So I set up a system where on one game, Lindsay would open on radio and do the first 2 innings, and Ralph kind of would do the 3rd and 4th, and Lindsay would do the 5th and 6th, and then he would switch to TV, and Bob Murphy would do the reverse, and Ralph did the middle innings, and then Ralph did a pre-game show and a post-game show for TV, so that factored into those decisions, and they all worked so well together. There were a lot of double headers in those days, and we had a program between games, and so that meant that one of them had to come down to the studio for between games. He didn't have time to have a hot dog or a soda or something, and they just the Mets announcers worked so well together, and they shared information with each other. They had a plan where certain kinds of background information would be used in the early innings, and then you leave it alone, because they didn't know what. So for instance, if Lindsay did the first 2 innings, Bob Murphy didn't know what he had said, and they didn't want to be repeating the same information, and so they had a system where they kind of worked it out, and they avoided that kind of repetition, and they also had a policy, which I think I helped stimulate, because I had worked for several years with CBS, and you work for the network that you work on. You're not rooting for one team, and we had a policy we didn't root, and they didn't root, and that wasn't the case in many of the teams, and I'm sure that there are times by inflection there might have been a little rooting where you kind of hoping your team will pull out the game in the 9th inning, and but with the Mets that was really even an opportunity. But they had a policy where they did not root. They just called the game as though it was a network game, and I think that was important. It wasn't that way on the Yankees games, because Bill Allen was. He didn't openly say like Milo would about we need 2 runs in the 9th or other ways of rooting. But by inflection you can root, and Mel would do that on occasion by inflection, but he tried not to. Except Mel Allen's enthusiasm was so great when the Yankees were doing well that was kind of a form of rooting, but. That's tough for an announcer not to do if he's covering the same team, on a regular basis. And but on the Yankee games, they had Mel Allen and Red Barber started working together in 1954 when Red Barber had left the Dodgers and the Yankees signed him, and that it became a turning point in my life. Because now I was working for both of them, and on the home games, I positioned myself on where the TV was, and it was Red and Mel sort of shared that, and Red liked my work, and I just all I was concerned about was having the correct batting averages, correct RBIs, or correct other background information, and not getting any deeper than that. And I worked hard at it, and also with Red Barber did a pregame show for TV. So I made sure when he got up to the booth that his lineup book was all made up, and any other information that he needed that was there. And also one of his hallmarks was Red believed that you should give the score of the game at least every 3 minutes, and he had an 8-timer that he kept in the booth with him. And even if he had given the score just now, and 10 seconds later he noticed that the 8-timer had gone down and he turned it over, and he would give the score again. Just because the announcers have so many things to say, so much to do, that you may have given the score, but you can't remember whether you did or not. And so Red would give the score, at least every 3 minutes. And I made that one of my assignments was if I saw that egg timer going down, I turned it over. And I think he liked that. And later, halfway through in the season, Red got me aside one day. And he had a very paternalistic way of talking to you. And he said, there's no future in being a scorekeeper. And I said, I understand that. I said, I've been waiting for the right opportunity. And he said, I think I have it for you. And Red at that time was the director of sports for CBS, which was, in those days, was primarily a radio responsibility. And he did a football roundup show every Saturday, starting in September. And he said, I could use some help on the radio program. So he got me into CBS. Then the following spring, they started the fall staff baseball game of the week. And I was hired as a producer. I was kind of the second or third producer in the cabinet, but I was there. And I had to learn what a producer does, the responsibilities of a producer. But I worked at it, and I learned. And that moved me up in the business. But it all happened because Red Barber liked my work, and I guess he liked my ethics. And he got me in at CBS, and I became a producer. And then when the Mets came along, I was interested in the Mets, and Lindsay was interested. Lindsay was at NBC at the time, and people used to say that you're crazy. What do you want to have to do a game every day? He said, I think I'd like to. Lindsay enjoyed being at the ballpark and doing a game every day. And so he was hired from NBC and I was hired from CBS.
That's an interesting correlation. You mentioned the CBS aspect with Red Barber getting you working with CBS, because remember, that's exactly how Vin Scully started. Red Barber got him doing a football game, I think, for CBS, I think from the roof of Fenway Park or something. And that was where he first discovered Vin.
That's right.
He did.
Yeah.
Well, I think Vin did some work on the Fordham. Fordham had a very good FM station. And I think Vin had done some work on that. But I'm not certain of the details. I know that story about the Fenway Park is something I've heard that. And so Red Barber basically discovered Vin Scully. And at the time, the Dodgers were in a state of flux on their announcers. They had Red Barber and the Connie Desmond, who was a great announcer. But Connie had some personal problems. And unfortunately, he couldn't control them, and he lost out. And then Vin Scully moved up the ladder. And of course, Vin was great from the beginning. So it was no problem with the decision. And when Red left, Vin stepped in as the number one guy, and he was we used to discuss who was the best baseball play-by-play man. And most of us New York people, and I don't know if others around the country agreed with that, but we figured, well, it was either Mel Allen or Red Barber, depending on who you preferred. But pretty soon we were saying, well, I don't remember Ralph Connor saying, well, Vin Scully is the best. And there was one time the Mets were in Cincinnati for a weekend series, and people from all over, from Indiana or other place, they would come in by busloads to watch the Reds on the weekend. And the Friday night game was rained out. So we're back at the Terrace Hilton Hotel. And there was mobbed with baseball fans from someplace. And they were partying. So Ralph and I joined their party. And we got talking baseball. Pretty soon it's about who were the best announcers. And Ralph said it's just no decision. It's Vin Scully. They hooted him down. They said it's Wade Hoyt.
Was their guy.
So Wade Hoyt was a wonderful, had been a great pitcher, and he was a wonderful storyteller and a very interesting person. And he used to broadcast the Reds games in past tense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so he was unique in that regard. And
He explained
people in Cincinnati loved him.
Well, and he explained it by saying, hey, if he hits the ball to the shortstop, by the time I tell you about it, it is past tense.
Yeah.
That was his explanation for it.
Yeah. But anyway, these Cincinnati fans from someplace in Indiana, whatever, they would you couldn't change their mind. The Wade Hoyt was the best. Forget about Mel Allen or Red Barber or whoever or Vince Scully, and that's, I think, is one of the good things. There are people in Houston. I'm sure thought that Milo was great. And maybe some did, maybe didn't.
The difference in the way it's changed now, as everybody knows, is the day of the solo announcer actually passed with Vin Scully's retirement, because he was the last of those that, when he took the microphone, if he had a guy sitting in there with him, you may not hear from him during the whole time he was doing play-by-play. And that's the way it was with Mel Allen and Red Barber in their primes, and that's the way it was broadcast. In fact, the Mets probably were one of the innovators of having that second guy there and actually having him say something.
Yeah, well, I think the business has changed also, Greg. There's so many in the format. Back in the days when I produced the Mets games, and you did 60 seconds of commercial at the end of each half inning, and then there might be an occasional drop-in announcement as you went along. Now it's constant drop-ins. Mm-hmm. There's 3 or 4 minutes of commercial after each half inning, which I think is kind of spoiling the game. I think it's ruining the game. And I think there are too many commercials. And they should figure out some way to get more money for each commercial and still come out ahead.
Well, they'll try.
Joe, let me ask you a question if I could. I grew up around New York City, and I, of course, listened to the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Giants. Were you the producer when Red Allen was working for the Yankees, and they kind of fell on hard times, and the attendance really lagged? And at one game, they had 600 people at Yankee Stadium, and Red Barber decided to show how many people were there. You part of that?
I remember that. I think that's probably around the time when I was doing the Mets games, when the Yankees had their down years, and of course the attendance fell off, and Red was a reporter, and he believed in honest reporting, and he believed in, if an infielder made a bad play, you tell people it was a bad play. You don't try to cover it up, and I guess Red made a point where to him the poor attendance was part of the story. Mm-hmm. He wasn't there to root for the team. He was there to report the game, and that was a negative in terms of his work. And
as I recall, he was told after that game to never do it again, to never report the attendance again. And so the next game they had a similar attendance, and he just let the camera pan the audience without saying anything. And that was the end of Red Barber and the Yankees.
Well, I wasn't part of that, so I can't really say, except that I can tell you that Red Barber was a man of the highest degree of integrity. Yeah. And he would not tell a lie. He would not do something that in his regard was incorrect or improper. And I think Red just probably stood his ground. One reason he ended up with the Yankees in the 1953 World Series, the custom in those days was the 2 teams participating, their number 1 announcer worked the World Series. And I don't know who called the shots. Gillette was the regular sponsor in those days. And it had to be 53 because the Dodgers were in 53, but not in 54. And the announcers on the World Series were paid a fee of like $200 a game, maybe $250. Wow. And Red, and they accepted it. It was just they would work for nothing if they had to, and because doing the World Series was a prestigious thing. But Red said that he wouldn't do it for what they were paying. He wanted more money, and they wouldn't give him the money, so he wouldn't do the series. And that was one of the things that became a big stepping stone for Vin Scully. And Red wouldn't do it, and Vin Scully was given the assignment. And then I don't know if Red quit or they fired him, but he was out. That's when he went with the Yankees.
Yeah.
But it all came over his taking that stand on receiving the proper amount of money, or at least something closer to a proper amount as a fee for being the broadcaster. And
Hey, Joe, did you know a guy by the name of Mike Burke who worked for the Yankees?
I didn't really know him. I know who he was, and I probably know him enough to say hello to him, but I didn't really know him.
Yeah, the only reason I mention his name is that it turns out he was a counter spy for the United States government in the immediate aftermath of World War II, and had a number of hairbreadth escapes and adventures for the United States, working with John Foster Dulles and other folks. And he wound up with the Yankees.
Well, wasn't Mike Burke with the executive with the Yankees when they went kind of?
He was.
Yes.
And that was a sad time for the Yankees, and it wasn't all the fault of the CBS that I think had appointed him to run the team, and he wasn't the right person to do it. But before that, Dan Topping and Del Webb had just dumped the budgets. They cut the scouting budget. They cut a lot of other things. And they knew they were selling the team, and they were trying to have a better P&L picture. And the Yankees went downhill on that. It used to be that they had a big scouting department. They spent money on a lot of things. But somewhere around 1960, 61 or whatever, they cut budgets in a very drastic way. And that hurt the team. And the Yankees won in 64. They weren't the best team. They won by habit. And you can do that. I mean, baseball and other sports too. Sometimes a team gets a habit of winning, and they know how to win. And the Yankees in 64 did not have a championship team, but they made it to the World Series, and the Cardinals did too, because the Phillies won. That's a whole other story.
Yeah. Joe, I know you can't see all the people who are on this Zoom broadcast, but I just wanted to let you know that Tal Smith is on. He's with us tonight.
I'm sorry.
I say Tal Smith is with us tonight. You were talking about Tal. He is with us tonight on this broadcast.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Tal if he had to jump through any hoops to let Lindsay get up in that gondola.
Tal's muted right now.
Yeah, I'm unmuted now, I think. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you hear me all right now? Yeah,
Yes.
that was, that was certainly a memorable event, memorable occasion. From our standpoint, obviously, there was so much great interest worldwide in the stands in the Astrodome, and we had all kinds of unusual requests. But when Joe asked us to do that, so we thought that just added to the overall appeal and the mystique of the dome, and it'd be great publicity and so on. So we were happy to do it, and there wasn't any problem whatsoever. It's an interesting vantage point from the gondola during the construction phase, and even after that, I had to be up there on several occasions. And I think it's a great vantage point. And I think from Lindsay, I don't know that I ever talked to Lindsay about it after that, but I would think it had to be very interesting from his standpoint.
No waivers of liability.
I was going to say that was the big thing. Nowadays, you'd have to have 18 lawyers, and you'd have to be signing a whole bunch of papers before you could even think about doing it.
Well, from that standpoint, it's not that inaccessible. I mean, there are catwalks that maintenance people and engineers had to traverse all the time. As I said, I was up there many times. I don't think there was any great risk from anybody unless they were scared of heights. And it was a safe, secure place, and it was an interesting.
Yeah.
it was an interesting vantage point, and I thought it was a unique thing as Stanford Lindsay and Joe and for the Mets to do, and as I said, it just added to the overall mystique and appeal of the Dome in those days, and I thought it was great.
Well, Tal, a lot of it was an ego. We just felt that if it could be done, that
Right.
we're New York, we should do it first.
Right. Yeah.
And that
Right.
was-
Absolutely. And I think from that standpoint, you're to be commended. It was an interesting thing. I don't know if anybody else would have suggested it or not, but I'm glad you did.
Well, there's one other thing I think you would appreciate this. Lindsay had a lot of trips to Houston. It's the Astrodome, some for football and other things.
Right.
And he had a story that I guess he was there for a football game a few years later, and one of the members of the ground crew came over to him and he said, "Mr. Lindsay," he said, "you went up in that gondola." He said, "You haven't gone up again." He said, "When are you going to go up there again?" And Lindsay said to him, "If you check your history books, you will find out that when Lindbergh flew the Atlantic, he came back by boat."
Back by boat.
Good story.
So it was a trip he made once, and he had a lot of courage. And Lindsay was the kind who would do things. It was during the 55 season, the World's Fair was on in New York, and the Goodyear blimp was stationed nearby. And because there were many occasions where the Goodyear blimp would have a camera, usually for ABC's doing a football game or a golf tournament. And I said, "Well, the blimp is here. We should use it." And I made arrangements first to have a camera go up. And I said, "Well, nobody's ever put an announcer up there." So I asked Lindsay, I said, "How about you going up and we had a doubleheader with the Dodgers or with the Giants. So either one was a sellout for the doubleheader." And Lindsay agreed that he would go up and do commentary from up in the sky. Yeah. And he did. And it was, something, we were trying something. Well, I get a call from the switchboard at Shea Stadium, and they said, "We're just inundated with phone calls. People say, 'Show the game.' They don't care about a blimp." So I said, "Okay." I immediately said, "Bring Lindsay down and we'll show the game. That's what we're here for." So, if you don't try, you don't know. And we were always willing to try. And Lindsay was always willing to do things like that. And he went up in the blimp and did his commentary from up in the sky.
One more minute.
So I had a great privilege of working with some super people like Lindsey Nelson and Bob Murphy and Ralph Klein. All three of them are in heaven right now. And I also had the privilege of, I was Mel Allen's statistician for 4 years. And then when Red Barber came along, and some of the backup announcers were super guy, Art Gleason, who had been a AAA ball player, but not an announcer on a level of Mel Allen or Kurt Gowdy, but he was a good announcer. And he worked 2 years as Mel's backup, and then they brought in Jim Woods. Jim Woods was a marvelous announcer, but Jim didn't want to be number one. He had many opportunities to be number one in various cities, and he just liked being the number two guy and enjoying the game and not having too much pressure to do speaking engagements and things like that. And but he was a great announcer, and so I got to work with them, and I worked with Jerry Coleman and Phil Rizzuto, and and I consider myself very lucky. And I also worked with Dizzy Dean and Buddy Blattner and then Pee Wee Reese on the baseball game of the week.
Yeah, Joe, you mentioned that you were the first producer of the Falstaff Game of the Week. Did I hear that? That's kind of how I got to be a baseball fan. I got weaned on the Game of the Week. We didn't have a lot of Major League Baseball games in Beaumont back then.
But I didn't get what you said.
I thought I heard you say you were the first producer of the Falstaff Game of the Week. Is that correct?
I was, when they started in '55, I was actually a junior producer. See, I was part of the team.
You worked
Before
with
that,
Gene-
before
with Gene
55,
Kirby?
there had been an occasional network broadcast of a baseball game, but not a regular series. And that's that was still the infancy of television, and network was still being built. Earlier in the 50s, or maybe around 48 or 49, the old Dumont television network did some sports. And I'm not sure if they did baseball or not, but and Dumont over the years has kind of segued into Fox television. But
That was with Dizzy Dean and all that time?
I'm sorry?
That was when Dizzy Dean started as the announcer?
Dizzy had worked Yankee games for a couple of years. And then and he did a lot of the mutual radio games. But then in 55, Fall CFB got the rights, and they made a deal. They brought the package to CBS. And I'm not sure who was technically the producer of it, whether it was CBS or Dancer Fitzgerald Sample, which was the Fall CF agency. And but we all worked together, and we got the games on.
Let me ask you a question. Let me ask you a question about who got
stories?
Go ahead.
I'm sorry, Jim.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask a question regarding where the games went. I was of the impression that in the early days of the game of the week, it could not be shown in major league cities.
That's true.
Yeah, that's why everyone down here, Beaumont, and I was in Kokomo, Indiana, we all saw them. But the people in Cincinnati and Chicago and New York maybe didn't.
That's true. The rule was that because most major league teams had their own weekend packages. Some teams had more than weekends, but a city like Cincinnati and some others had a weekend package. So Saturday afternoon was in Cincinnati. The WLW had a game. They showed a Reds game, and so we couldn't compete with that. However, in those days, there was no Major League Baseball west of the Mississippi, except St. Louis, and south of. Mm-hmm. So most of the country was wide open, mm-hmm. and even when the Dodgers and Giants moved to the West Coast, they gave their approval. If they didn't have a game going, the Dodgers were very slow on getting into television. They were Walter O'Malley was interested in developing pay TV. And so they didn't have regular TV. So I would say most of the time we were able to show the game in LA or San Francisco. But they certainly, the whole Southwest, the South, and many parts of the country. And people were eager. They wanted to watch baseball.
What is the name?
I'm sorry?
Could you tell pregame stories like the one about Ted Williams, where you did pregame for the CBS Game of the Week?
Ted Williams?
Yeah.
Pick up, Jim.
Oh, you mean when Ted wanted to punch me out?
Yeah, exactly.
In 1958, the pregame show was George Kell, and I'm sure you all remember George Kell, a great ball player. He was from Swifton, Arkansas, and where Swifton is, I have no idea, but someplace not far from Little Rock. And George was hired to do the pregame show on the CBS Game of the Week, and it was a big moment for me because I was named as his producer, and the first weekend of the season, we had booked Casey Stengel to be his guest. We had a preseason game. Oh, with baseball, we called it an exhibition game. Preseason was football. But at any rate, the Yankees were playing the Phillies in Jacksonville, and so we booked Casey to be George's guest. George didn't want Casey, and he was too much in awe of Casey. He was afraid he wouldn't be able to deal with him. And we said, "Don't worry about it, George. Casey will be great." And he wanted to interview Gil McDougall, who would be fine. But I said, "You've got to interview Casey." He said, "We've sold the advertising. We've done the sponsorship on the fact that Casey would be the first show." And so he went on, and George was great. And I said to George, I said, "Ask Casey how he makes out his lineup." Because Casey was famous for the different lineups he had. And so that was a good idea. And he asked him the question about making out his lineup. And Casey starts off with, well, he said, I'll put Hank Bauer up first. He said, because Hank Bauer will get a double. He won't just get a single. He'll hit a double. And then the next batter, he said, if I have George Kell on my team, he said, I'll have Kell batting second, and he'll hit behind the runner and move Bauer over to third. And he does this in a way where he's building up Kell. And he's talking baseball. And he goes on now about you build one run in the first inning, and that gets you started. And he said when that one run in the first inning, as the game goes along, it's better to win 6-5 than lose 5-4. I always forget that was Casey's advice. Better to win 65 than lose 5-4. Well, by now we've losed up the whole program. Kell didn't have to ask a second question. And we had a good show. But that was Casey. I mean, Casey knew. I mean, he was so smart. He knew it, dude. One of the little known about Casey Stengel was when he was with the Braves, I guess as a manager, he and Al Lopez and Johnny Cooney, who had been an outfielder for I think the Red Sox, maybe some other teams, they invested in Sarasota real estate. And they became rich. The three of them. Just on investing their money. Casey came from money. His wife was related to a family that had Glendale Federal Savings Bank. And so Casey wasn't managing to make money. He was managing for love of the game. And he was really such an interesting person. So, was that the question you asked, Jim?
Yeah, I mean, how about maybe some other pregame stories like Ted Williams or Frank Robinson?
Well, you have to ask. You have to try things. If you're,
Joe Gallagher.
Yeah, you don't want to just go along with the flow. If you go along with the flow, you have dull shows. And there was a time in 1958. That was Kell's first year, and we had arranged ahead of time we had the Red Sox at Comiskey Park. So we had booked Ted Williams to be Kell's pregame guest. And it was that week where Ted did something in a game I'm not sure where it was, but he made an obscene gesture at a fan, and it got a lot of bad publicity. So, I'm a beginning producer, and the other guy's fellow who was the senior producer, he wanted me to get Ted to apologize for his. And instead of saying, "Hey, get lost, let me do the job," I spoke to Ted, and that was a big mistake. Ted wanted to throw me into the river. He was so ticked off, and we're getting ready to go on the show, and he's standing there with Kell, and his mic is open, and he's still bad mouthing me, and George Kell finally said to me, "Stop bad mouthing Gallagher. He's just doing his job." And Ted stopped. And I realized that we shouldn't have the mic open. We're eavesdropping on him. That's wrong. We don't have any right to be eavesdropping. He's there to do a show. So I had the audio man kill the mic, but I was open long enough where I heard Kell say to Ted, "Stop picking on Gallagher. He's just doing his job," and Ted agreed. And the funny was, a year later, we had a pregame show where they didn't want to pay Dizzy Dean his fee or a fee. Dizzy held out for too much. And that's one reason they hired Kell at 58. But George was so good that the Tigers hired him. And he went to Detroit to be one of the Tigers announcers. And they weren't going to pay Dizzy what he wanted. So they anguished over that. But they didn't have a sponsor for the program like they did in 58. So Bill McPhail came to me one day and he said, well, our solution is you. He said, we're going to have two players interview each other. And you're the guy, you know all the players, you make it work. Okay, I'll do it. And the first week we had Jackie Jensen and Vic Wertz. That was an easy one. They were both college guys, both very articulate, both very bright. We had them interview each other. Then after that, it was up to me. And I would, well, I knew the players well enough. I knew who could talk and who was shy about talking. But one of the shows I was proud of, the year before in 58, we had the Braves scheduled, and I said to Kell, I said, how about we have you interview Eddie I said, have you interview Hank Aaron? And Kell said, no, I don't want to interview Aaron. And he said, he gives short answers. And that concerned me because this 58 was the year after Little Rock. And I said, well, how about Eddie Matthews? I said, I don't want to interview Matthews. He gives short answers too. Well, that made me feel better because he was turning them both down, not because of racial problems, but because of short answers. And I understood that. And the Braves had so many good players and articulate players, guys like Del Crandall and Warren Spahn and others. And I forget who we ended up with, but we had a good show. So now it's 1959, and we have the Braves on the schedule, and I've got to have one of these pregame shows where two players interview each other. And I booked Eddie Matthews and Hank Aaron to interview each other. The two guys that Kell didn't want to interview because they gave short answers. And to make it work, I remember the Braves were in Philadelphia, and I went to Philadelphia a little bit early, and it was at the Friday afternoon game. They played afternoon games in those days. And rode the bus with the team back to the hotel, and I sat with one of them. And I just explained to them. And my basic line to them was, if you guys can't talk about baseball for 5 or 6 minutes, there's got to be something wrong. Yeah, you're right. Yeah, we could do that. And the real problem was that, and you're not used to that. You're an announcer, and you're there on camera, and you have dialogue going. You're not keeping track of the time. And sometimes 2 minutes seems like a long time. So we had to be concerned about them getting the right signals. And so I just, I spent time with each of them and explained basically what they should look for. And the next day they did the show, and it was fine. And that was pretty much the thing that the one with Frank Robinson was, Frank Robinson was such a superstar with the Reds, and we wanted to have him on one of the shows. And the question was, well, who do you pair him with? And I didn't know all of the Reds that well, so I initially said to Frank, I said, why don't we have you, and Don Newcomb was with the Reds that year. I said, why don't you have you and Don Newcomb? And he said, we don't talk to that man. Well, I wasn't that stunned me, but I wasn't going to get into that. I just said, hey, he's rejected Newcomb. And I said, well, how about Vada Pinson? He said, yeah, that'd be great. Well, I had been shying away from Pinson because he was a very quiet individual. And I figured, when you're doing a pairing like this, you want to get at least one guy who will be a gabber, and the other, And so, but we we went with him, and Frank Robinson and Veda Pinson were good. They did a good show. Well, the big thing is that on Monday, I guess, I get back and go into the office, and McPhail calls me on the carpet, and he said, 2 stations from Alabama have dropped the program because you're 2 blacks on.
Oh, man.
What? Why? They're baseball players. But McPhail's response was, don't do that again. Always, if you have a black guy on, make sure you have a white guy in with him. I said, okay. I didn't especially like that, but that's the kind of thing you can live with that. And but that was America. That's probably America today too. So we did. However, sometime I guess in August we had the Indians on, and I forget who the guys were. I think Vic Powell was one of the guys, and and the second guy who would be a natural with Vic Powell was also black. And McPhail had given me specific instructions. So, but Jimmy Pearsall was with the Indians at that time, and Pearsall was an excellent talker. I mean, he was probably still crazy, but he could talk. And so I had budget flexibility where I could put 3 guys on if I wanted to, and that was maybe the only time all year that I did. And so I had Pearsall in between them, and he interviewed Vic Power and one other, Suitcase Simpson or whoever it was. And
Joe.
On Monday I go into the office, and McPhail said to me, "I know what you were doing." He said, "Just be careful." But again, that was America. But I mean, Bill McPhail was a super guy, and he knew, and it didn't bother him. However,
empty spaces.
He had to talk to the sales department, and so for the rest of the year we were a little more careful. But I tell you, that same year, one of the Giants in '59, the National League pennant was very tight, and the Giants were in first place by about 5 games going into September. And I had booked Orlando Cepeda to be on one of the shows. But Willie McCovey was a rookie that year, and McCovey was tearing the league apart, and he was headlines. So McPhail got me. He said, "Are you going to have McCovey on this weekend?" I said, "No." I said, "I booked Cepeda," and I forget who I had Cepeda matched with, Jim Davenport or somebody. And he said, "Well, why don't you have McCovey on?" I said, "Because I've booked Cepeda." And Cepeda was a very sensitive kind of individual. I remember going to Bill Wrigley and asking Bill Wrigley his advice. And Bill Wrigley said, "That's your decision, Joe. Don't ask." He said, "I got enough problems, don't ask me." And so I stuck. I said, "Cepeda is the man." And we did it. Well, we had the Giants on again a couple of weeks later, and we were able to put McCovey on. So it all worked out well. And that was the other Giants blew their 5-game lead, and the season ended with the Dodgers and the Braves tied for first. And then the Dodgers won. But I'm glad you asked that question, Jim, because baseball is so fascinating, and the people are so fascinating. And the people who play the game are just like you and me, and they just happen to be able to throw the ball or hit the ball and run the bases. They're gifted physically to do certain things, and they play the game. Other than that, they're just like everybody else.
Who was it, the Dodger pitcher that wouldn't do an after-game interview?
I'm sorry, Jim.
You had a Dodger pitcher that at first refused to do the after-game interview, the post-game interview.
A Dodger pitcher?
Yeah. Or was it a Philly pitcher?
Yeah.
Was it Bunning?
Upstairs.
Bunning or Koufax?
I'm not getting you. You have to be more explicit with
I
me.
was just sure.
Okay. Joe, how about your first season with the Mets? Some of the things that you guys did.
How
Some of
about
the
who?
interviews with the Mets, early Mets broadcasts. How about your Casey Stengel birthday cake before the game?
All right, remember
I
there
think
was
your audio is coming through not the best
Isn't
right
it?
now. That's why I think we're having trouble.
Okay.
there was a situation.
Distorted.
What they tried to give Mark Thornberry a cake for his birthday, but they refused to have him hold it because they thought he would drop it, like everything else.
Joe, how about some Marv Thornberry stories?
He should be in the Hall of Fame. Yeah, because I mean that's a special story. The Mets got Bob Thornberry early in the '62 season, and he had the knack of making an error at just the right time to ruin a rally or to give the other team a rally. He was just something different, but he was such a laid back individual and a nice individual that you couldn't get mad at him. And you knew he was trying. I mean, there was one game when at the Polo Grounds when the Mets, I think, they were playing Cincinnati, which was one of the top teams, and the Mets had men on first and third, and Thornberry hit one into the right center gap. And if you remember the Polo Grounds, it laid out like a football field. The ball went between the center field and right field and hit the wall and rolled out. And anyway, Thornberry slides into third, and 2 runs are scored. Puts the Mets ahead of the Reds. And the Reds put the appeal play on at second base, and Thornberry is called out. And only one of the runs counted. As Casey Stengel is coming out of the dugout, he's trundling out towards second base to argue the call. And Cookie Lavagetto, who was the coach at first base, as Casey went by him, Cookie said, "Don't argue too hard, Casey. He missed first base too." And that's the way Thornberry was. There was another one when the Mets couldn't execute a rundown play. They just had the knack of letting one of the runners run into them, and then interference would be called, or they would botch it up some way. And Casey, he was wearing the guys out about doing it right. And there's one game, I don't know who they're playing, but there was a game, man on third base and man on first and third, and they picked the guy off at first base, and there's a rundown. So they run him down, and they did it so well as they tagged the guy out. Thornberry looked around at Casey, said, "See, he forgot about the man on third who scored. It was the go-ahead run for the other team." And I think the other team planned it that way. And that's the way losing teams do things. And the Mets, and I don't know about the Astros if they have those kind of problems, but the Mets did. And and Thornberry was at the center. He just had the knack of screwing up at the right time. But he did it in such a genial way that everybody loved him. I mean, there was one game where Richie Ashburn played center field. It was Richie's last season in the majors. And he had been a good ball player. And I mean, he was a legitimate all-star player. And he still wasn't a bad player for the Mets. But anyway, in one game, he made 2 errors in 1 inning. And when the end of the half inning, when they go into the dugout, Thornberry walked over to Ashburn and he said, "You're trying to steal my fans." That was 1962 was a very unusual season and a fascinating season. I personally, I consider it the best year of my life because there were so many different things that were of interest, and a lot of it was Casey Stengel. We also had in those days Ford Frick had put out a memorandum saying that a TV camera could not show the dugout. That was the home, the players' home, and it was their private territory. And, the conversation was that he didn't want to show guys kicking the water bucket and things like that, which occasionally happened. And I guess didn't want to show people smoking, which they could handle just by saying don't smoke. But anyway, the rule was you don't show the dugout. So when we had our trip to St. Pete in February, it was sort of to get George Weiss's approval for me to be the producer. And myself and Norm Varney, who was the director of sports at J. Walter Thompson Advertising Agency, and we went to St. Pete and we had dinner with George Weiss, and we covered a lot of chit chat and grounds, and I brought up the question of the dugout, and I pointed out to him. I said we're in competition with the Yankee television. I said it would help us if we had some little advantage here and there over the Yankees TV. And I said, and one of them would be Casey Stengel. I said, the Ford Frisk has put out a memo saying we can't show the dugout. And I said, I would like your permission for us to show Casey in the dugout. George Weiss, he'd been fired by the Yankees the year before. He was looking for some reason to. And we would.
We're losing you. Can't hear you.
Can't hear you, Joe.
TV crews and so forth for most of the teams. And their directors were under directions not to show the dugout. So when we come along, we say, show the dugout. And I remember Jack Simon, who was their main director, and a great director. And he used to say, we can't show the dugout. I said, to show the dugout. If somebody complains, have them see me. And that went on the whole season. Every time, because he wasn't with us every game, just now and then. But we showed the dugout, and we showed more than just Stengel. But showing Stengel was our selling piece, and it was it's a little bit of the competition. And I used to say that we weren't on TV. We weren't playing the Cardinals or the Cubs or the Reds. We were competing with the Yankees. And the Yankees had a veteran and a great director, a fellow named Jack Murphy, who had directed the Yankee games for years and was an excellent director, and a regular crew. And for at least those earlier, they still were a good team. So we were trying to build audience. We were trying to develop fans. And so I said earlier, we didn't root, but at the same time, we were trying to do a job for not just for the team, but for our sponsors and for our fans too. So one way of developing fans was we played up Ernie Banks and Stan Musial, and Ted Kluszewski, and other big names, and Don Drysdale and Sandy Koufax and so forth. The Colt 45s took the opposite tack. My recollection was that they concentrated like on a pregame show. They put on their players. They held, a lot of young players, and they were just trying to build up their players. The Mets had some young players, but the Mets had built their team with name players who were basically over the hill, guys like Gil Hodges and Ashburn and Gene Woodling and Frank Thomas and Charlie Neal. And we played, well, we didn't play so much to them. We played to the visiting team. We put on stars from the games of the Polar Grounds. We put on stars from the visiting team, just to let people know that these are the people you're going to see if you come to the game. And so nobody said I was doing it wrong or nobody said I was doing it right. They let me do it. I think we were doing it right.
How about Nat King Cole?
So, I don't, the years of 62 through 65 were, I consider, the best years of my life, and I wish I had kept doing it. Except I had kids at home, and they were growing up without seeing their daddy, and my wife was letting me know that. So in 65, NBC made me an offer, and I said at least I'd be home during the week, and maybe doing a game on the weekend. But I said this is a chance for me to get to know my kids, and I left the Mets, and so you win and you lose.
How about Nat King Cole? About Nat King Cole?
I'm going to put you on my staff. We had we're televising a game at Dodger Stadium, from Dodger Stadium back to New York, and I just had all these Hollywood people went to the games, and I had noticed that King Cole was pretty much a regular at the Mets games, and I didn't know if he went to other teams' games, but he probably was a New Yorker, and he went to the Mets games, and so I just told Lindsay, I said, I'm going to ask Nat King Cole to come on and do a cameo at the end of the 7th inning. And he's fine, try. And about 20 minutes before game time, I noticed he had arrived at the ballpark, and I went down to his seat, and I introduced myself, and I said, we were just wondering if you were televising the game back to New York, or wondering if you'd come on and just make a cameo appearance. And he looked at me. I thought he was going to say no. And he said, when would you want me? I said, well, the end of the 7th inning, we don't have a commercial scheduled. I said, that would be a good time. And he said, you come get me when you need me. So at the end of the 6th inning, I went down to his seat, and I said, now's the time. And I escorted him back to the elevator. We went up to the press box level. And at the end of the 7th inning, he was there with Lindsey Nelson, and turned the camera around, and Lindsey asked him some perfunctory question. And before Lindsey could ask him another question, he said, Lindsey, I have a message for the fans of New York. And Lindsey said, oh, yeah. And he sang the Rheingold beer song. People in Texas may not even know what Rheingold beer was, but it was a local beer. But I think it had some kind of a national distribution, and they did pretty well, and they were one of the anyway. The Rheingold beer song was the music was an old German song with some of my beer is Rheingold, the dry beer. Think of Rheingold whenever you buy beer. It's not bitter, not sweet, extra dry flavored treat. Won't you try extra dry Rheingold? And he sang that song a cappella. And now when he finishes, the minute is up. They're ready to play. Lindsey said, that was amazing, Mr. Cole. He said, thank you very much. I escorted him back down to his seat. And when we got down near the seat, I said, that's a marvelous thing that you did. I said, why did you do that? He said, Joe, you may not remember. He said, but not too long ago, he said, a black man or woman couldn't have their own TV show. And I was the first one who did. And the reason I did was that Rheingold Beer was the sponsor. And he said, this was just a little payback.
Oh.
I said, that's amazing. I said, thank you. Shook hands and I left. And the owner of the brewery, and I mean, it's, you figure the people in the bars back in New York, and especially in Harlem and the black areas, they hear a testimonial like that, they're going to respond. And but that wasn't my job. Was just to do a good show, and having a man like Nat King Cole on, even just for a minute, was tremendous. And the owner of the brewery, Philip Liebman, called somebody the next day and so marvelous it was. And I got one. I felt good. I didn't get a raise or anything like that, but I felt good. I'm just glad that he didn't sing the Valentine song.
I can relate to that. Or Schaefer, either one. Joe, you've been doing a marvelous job. You're talking about my age when I was growing up, my baseball days. And I can relate to every single story that you told. It's just great to hear these things, these stories, and your memory is terrific, absolutely phenomenal. So we thank you. Does anybody have a question for Joe?
Yes. Joe, can you sing Wabash Cannonball?
I'll just say this. To me, it was so lucky for me to have been hired by a man named Norm Varney, who was in effect director of sports for J. Walter Thompson. And the beer companies apparently are very volatile in who handles their advertising and Rheingold had been with a couple of other agencies when they got the Mets contract. And they were talking to different people to be their announcers and somebody as a producer and so forth. And I just, I somehow was aware of it. And I was thinking, I think I'd be interested in doing that. And then all of a sudden, and I'm not sure exactly when, but not too far before the beginning of the 62 season, Rheingold changes their advertising agency again. And they go there with J. Walter Thompson. And and Norm Varney, who was the vice president at J. Walter Thompson, and I had known him just a little bit because he'd been at Yankee Stadium a few times for client reasons, and Ralph Kiner had already been hired. Exact by whom, I'm not sure, but Ralph was already a fixture. But Lindsay and Murph were not. And how Norm Varney got in touch with Lindsay Nelson or why, I don't know. But he wasn't satisfied with the people who were in the picture from the previous agency. And he asked Lindsay if he was interested. And Lindsay said, yeah, nobody's asked me if I was. And he said, yes, I am. So they end up hiring Lindsay. And Bob Murphy had left the Red Sox a few years before and was working the Orioles games. And the Orioles were in a state of flux at the time. And I don't know, it was a sponsorship thing or station thing. And Murph's tenure in Baltimore was very edgy. And he was kind of nervous about that. But Norm Varney was familiar with Murph's work from some stuff he had done in Boston. And so he approached Murph. And Murph was delighted. And he hired Bob Murphy. And the unusual thing is that Murph was on very uneasy ground because the Mets had ownership that really wasn't experienced in baseball. Is the lady Joan Payton, who was the owner of the team, and a lovely lady, but she wasn't based. She was horse racing, and she had a M. Donald Grant, who was a Wall Street broker, who was her main liaison, and M. Donald Grant tried to run the show, but he didn't know what he was doing, and he used to wear Murphy out, and for the first year or so, Murph was very nervous about whether he would continue, and finally, I guess somebody talked to Donald Grant and said, "Leave Murphy alone," and Murph settled down. And Murph was there until a couple of years ago, and of course, he retired and then passed away. But Murph did a wonderful job. He's a great baseball announcer, and of course, Lindsay was in a class by himself. Lindsay was just an outstanding individual, and not to say the others weren't. Red Barber was great. Mel Allen was great. Their secondary announcers were very good, but the Yankees got into kind of nobody was running the show. And that hurt them. Yeah. So I just thought, I mean, those 4 years were, for me, were great years. If I'd stayed there longer, I wouldn't know my kids. And I'm glad I know my kids. So.
Well, we're glad to know you.
Hey, well, I'm delighted. I feel like I'm on cloud nine right now. Just not just talking baseball, but talking about things that go on in baseball and how baseball becomes great and how we sell the game to the American public. And I will say this: I think that baseball is probably longer making a big mistake these days. Like with all of there's so many games on TV that they have no meaning. And I remember it used to be that with the baseball game, the fall staff game of the week, the people out in the Midwest and the Far West and South, and people used to wait for Saturday to be able to watch Dizzy Dean and Buddy Blatt and bring whatever the game from Cincinnati or from Cleveland or Chicago or Detroit or once in a while Yankee Stadium and or the Polo Grounds. That was something special that they did on Saturday. People would build their weekend around watching the baseball game of the week. And Fall Staff beer went from being number 100 best-selling beer in the country to number 2 or 3. And so it has different kinds of effects. But it certainly sold baseball for the rest of the country. People didn't have to sell it. People love baseball. And I think they still do, except I think there's too much of it.
They have to pay the salary somehow. These huge salaries, and TV gets them a lot of revenue.
Yeah. Well.
Okay, guys and gals. Thank Joe very much for participating. Joe, you ought to write a book. I thought I'd throw that out there. You got so many good stories. You ought to write a book.
That's what some of my friends keep telling me. Actually, I've been working on some podcasts of late.
Good.
Which, I know I'm not the only one doing that, but I'm doing it with a fellow in Knoxville. He's a good sports announcer, and we've done 7 of them so far. The last one we did was last weekend. We did a discussion on Tom Seaver and Gil Hodges and how the two of them impacted the outcome of the 1969 season. And that really is a sort of, because I don't know how much the sports writers transmitted that story, but Gil Hodges was just determined for the Mets to do things right. And he brought that determination to the fore, to the point where they followed him. They took his leadership. And Tom Seaver was also part of the leadership. Tom Seaver joined the Mets in '67, and I remember we had a game in Atlanta. The Mets were the visiting team, and Tony Kubek and I were talking to Seaver, and he's a rookie, right? But you could just tell. I just listened. I just let Kubek and Seaver do the talking. That Seaver just was. His attitude was, we're here to win games. We're not here to be clowns. Up until that point, the Mets players and their front office, everybody was just satisfied that, well, if they win a couple more games than they did last year, it's a good season. If they get close to 500, it's a good season. 500 wasn't good enough for Seaver. He said, we can win more games. And it was just, I remember walking away from that conversation, just feeling, this is the way you should be thinking. You got to think win. And that's got to be your reason for being there, is to win games. And it paid off. I mean, it wasn't just Seaver, obviously. They brought in several other good players. And they also had Nolan Ryan and Jerry Koosman and Gary Gentry and some other good pitchers. And they had Jerry Grody as a catcher, who they just made some right moves. So they put together a team that won the pennant in '69 and won the World Series. And when you consider what they were, just a few short years prior to that, it was a miracle. But it can be done. And I don't know if I don't know if many owners of the teams nowadays realize that, or if they care. They get so much TV money, and they're making money whether they win or lose. So what difference does it make? I don't mean to sound cynical, but I think there's something to that. All I do is I cite the '69 Mets as an example. When you have the determination, and Gil Hodges had that determination, and Tom Seaver had that determination, and it rubbed off enough on the other guys that they won. And there were some other extenuating circumstances, like in '69, Ron Santo got hurt at a very crucial time of the season. He was a key guy for the Cubs, and the Cubs sort of went into a tailspin, and that helped the Mets win. But Mets also did everything right. I think they won 24 out of the last 32. Are you going to cut me off now?
It's up to the group.
Jim, you promised me overtime.
Does Joe live in Houston?
Oh, he lives in Austin.
Oh,
We're living in Austin. We lived in Houston for 16 years, and I loved it. To me, Houston is a fascinating city, and people in Houston are very accepting. They accept the newcomer, and you're judged by what you do or what you can do, and not who you are or where you're from. And it's a city that is just, it's open to everybody, and it's if you look at Houston, it's one of the few big cities in our country that has not had overt racial strife, because they recognize that everybody has to get a little bit of the pie. And that happens in Houston. And to me, Houston, if you take away the bad weather or the potential for flooding, Houston is as good a place as there is.
that's very generous. Thank you.
Yeah. Joe, I asked Joe again this morning, I said, Joe, if you can give us an hour worth of material, we'd be thrilled to death. Well, so far it's been an hour and 50 minutes, so we thank you for that. We do have a number of members who do want to do the trivia contest that we have. So we do have a trivia contest. I don't know if Scott Arzilla is on. Are you on there, Scott?
I'm gonna listen on the trivia contest and not take part, if that's okay.
Okay, good.
Scott is here.
Okay, I can't hear him.
He's muted.
Well, let's unmute him.
I'm here.
Okay. Good. Scott, would you like to take the people through your trivia contest?
Sure. We got 10 questions for those who would like to play. Grand total of 35 total answers.
Hey, Bob, people are starting to drop
So I'll
off.
wait for about a minute, let everybody.
Hey, Bob, or if you'd like to participate in the poll questions, I have some pretty interesting questions. I'll do this right after the trivia contest, if that's okay. So we can, and I'll report the, findings when I post the video. So if you want to participate, I got some pretty interesting questions I'd like to ask everybody. So people are starting to drop off, so I thought I'd try to stop them.
Okay. Let's go.
Okay, so is everybody ready?
Yeah.
Got a thumbs up? Okay. Number one, this weekend, Albert Pujols hit his 661st and 662nd home runs of his career. Who did he pass on the all-time home runs list?
Answer it yourself. Count him up later.
Okay. Number two,
How many players have hit 600 or more home runs in their career? Bonus points for everyone that you can name. So 1 point for each player you can name on that list. And a point for if you get the total number of players correct. So how many players have hit 600 or more home runs in their career? And who are they, if you possibly can get that?
Okay. Right.
We can take last names for short on most of those because I think we all know most of those guys. Okay, for number 3, where does Albert Pujols rank on the all-time RBI list? And for number 4, I'll give everybody a free point. He does have more than 2,000 RBIs. How many players total have over 2,000 RBIs? And 1 point for each player you are able to list. Okay, we'll move on to number 5. Tom Seaver won 3 Cy Young Awards during his career. 1 point each for naming the seasons that he won them. So in what seasons did Tom Seaver win his Cy Youngs? There are 3 of them. I think we heard one season mentioned prominently in the last discussion. Okay, so number 6. How many pitchers in history have won 3 or more Cy Young Awards? And then list as many of those as you can. Well, losing some folks. The rest of the quiz gets shorter after this, so no more list. Okay, number 7. One franchise in history has won the World Series every time they have gone to the playoffs. Which franchise has done that?
Good question.
We know it's not the Astros.
Okay.
I think they're going to make the playoffs this year in the expanded format. Okay, number 8. Who is the current leader in home runs in Major League Baseball?
This season?
For this season, yes. Who is the current leader?
All time or just this season?
Just this season.
Just this season.
Who is the current home run leader this season? Okay, number 9. A player this week accomplished a rare feat of being ejected after hitting a home run. Who was that player? I think George Breton, was it George Breton, 84 or 85, was the last one to do it, I think, before this player accomplished that feat. And finally, number 10, we saw George Springer hit an inside the park home run on Sunday. What former Astro is the all-time franchise leader with 4 inside the park home runs?
Wow.
And does anybody need any question repeated? Okay. I guess, are we ready for answers?
Yes.
Okay. So number 1, who did Albert Pujols pass up on the all-time home run list?
Say hey, kid. Say hey, kid.
Yeah, that's right. Willie Mays at 660. Okay, number 2, how many players have more than 600 home runs? Anybody want to throw out a guess?
I counted 6.
There's actually 9.
Holy cow. Oh.
Your 9 players in order are Barry Bonds, Babe Ruth, Hank Aaron, Alex Rodriguez, Albert Pujols, Willie Mays, Ken Griffey Jr., Jim Thome, and Sammy Sosa.
Was that 8?
That was 9. That was 9.
Who were they?
So Bonds, Ruth, Aaron, A-Rod, Pujols, Mays, Griffey, Thome, and Sosa.
Not to be snarky, but I think Aaron is number 2.
Okay, how many players have 2,000 or more RBIs
7.
in their career? The answer is actually 5. I'm sure most of y'all got the first 3 at least. A-Rod, Ruth, and Pujols. Aaron, Ruth, and Pujols. Then A-Rod. And here's the one that kind of jumped out of nowhere. Cap Anson is the 5th one. Okay. The next one is the seasons of which Seaver won the Cy Youngs. The first one was 69, which I think everybody knew. Then 73, and then 75. Okay, how many pitchers have won 3 or more Cy Young awards? This one shocked me when I looked it up.
4.
Answer is actually 10.
Holy cow.
Yes. So going from recent, Max Scherzer has done it. Randy Johnson has done it. Clayton Kershaw has done it. Steve Carlton has done it. Of course, Seaver is one. Maddox, Clemens, Koufax, Palmer, and Pedro Martinez. Okay, this was my favorite question. The franchise that has won the World Series every time it's been to the playoffs.
Miami Marlins.
That is correct. Florida/Miami Marlins. Who is the current home run leader in Major League Baseball?
Tatis.
Is it Tatis Jr.?
It is Luke Voigt.
Oh.
Has 21 home runs with the Yankees. That kind of jumped out of nowhere as well. Let's see, who got thrown out after hitting a home run?
Donaldson.
Donaldson.
George Donaldson.
That was Josh Donaldson with the Earl Weaver kicking of dirt on home plate. And the all-time leader in inside the park home runs in Astros history is
Bob Watson. He was,
I would actually have thought it would be somebody like Cedeno, but it wasn't.
Joe
It was
Morgan.
in fact Ken Caminetti with 4.
Oh my heavens. Yeah.
So that is a grand total of 35 possible answers.
What was the answer to number 1?
Willie Mays.
Willie Mays. Okay, so let's see. How many people have 5 or more?
Yeah.
1, 2, 3. Okay. We'll go with 10. 1, 2, 3. Okay. Let's see. 12.
Don't tell.
Okay. Still got some. 15.
No.
Still got some. 17. Oh, we got 1. Let's see. Let's see if we got 2.
Got Herb and Max.
Okay. So it looks like I only got 2 left. So one shall state your totals here.
I had 20.
Herb had 20.
I had 20.
Whoa.
What's
20?
the tiebreaker? Where's Jim Coons?
The winner?
20-20.
Who wants to volunteer?
Well,
Next time.
Herb's been the longest since Herb won, so it's his turn to write one.
Is it 20 Canadian or 20 American?
Nice. Nice.
Herb, you good with that? Herb, are you ready?
Well, October, I probably won't be able to be here, so I can do it in November.
That sounds like a program. Max?
I can do October.
Okay, good.
All right, Max.
Thank you. All right, Joe.
We'll just alternate trivia contest.
All right. If before everybody leaves, I have 4 quick questions on the poll here. They should pop up, and you should be able to see it, and you should be able to answer it automatically. So here are the questions. Can everybody? Can people see?
Yep.
First one is Justin Verlander's time with the Astros over.
No.
No,
Answer
you can use your computer to answer. You should be able to answer automatically on your computer. Second question, will the Astros play at Globe Life Park again in 2020 after September 27th? In other words, are they going to be in the World Series? And the third question, who will the American League pennant winner in 2020 be? Houston, Oakland. And number 4, who will the National League pennant winner be in 2020?
Oh.
So I'll give everybody about 30 more seconds to answer these, and I'll show you. I'll share the results with you, and they'll automatically save, and I'll share them with Bob or whoever writes it up. The write-up.
Has George Springer hit his last home run in Minute Maid Park?
Adam.
No, that's not on there, but I say no.
No, we got the playoffs.
No, but we're not going back to Minute Maid Park for the whole playoffs.
Right. No. The Dodgers are coming to play at Minute Maid Park. I think we ought to go down and boo.
Yeah, we ought to hold up signs. All right, I'll give people 10 more seconds, and then I'll end the polling and share the results.
Will they let us bring in trash cans?
I love it.
All right, I'm going to end the polling, and I will share the results. 13 says Verlander's time with the Astros is done. 16 people say the Astros aren't going to the World Series. Tampa Bay is the favorite in the American League.
Wow.
And the Dodgers are the favorite in the National League. Wow. Dodgers and Padres were the only two that got a vote. I don't believe in Atlanta, huh? Okay.
You relegated Yankees to other.
Yes, I did on purpose.
That might have changed the vote.
Because they deserve to be other.
Thank you, Joe.
All right.
That was good.
Good
Maybe
thing
we'll do it
Riley's
again.
not here.
I'll do it again next month. Well, I'll have some more questions.
Yeah, Biley would have been upset. I agree with Mark. Right. Our next meeting is October 20th, and that's significant because there is no ball game being played on October 20th. It's a break between the playoffs and the World Series, or between the World Series, so we don't have to have conflict. Bill Nolan will be our speaker. He has interviewed a number of umpires. He's just written a book on umpiring, and I've known Bill for a long time, and he'll do a good job. And I don't know if Fred's still on there or not. Fred, you still with us? Fred Reynolds? Guess not. Anyway, he's writing a piece for our newsletter for Joe West. And Scott, we haven't formally asked you to write a letter or write a column. Yes, you're formally asking you. I assume that's you. What's that comment? Okay. Terrific job, Joe. Thank you so much. Good to meet you, see you, hear from you.
Oh, thank you for having me. I
We
enjoyed
wish you
it.
the best. And Larry, great to see you tonight. And look forward to seeing you again next month.
Thank you, Bob.
That's
Thank
all,
you.
folks. That's all I got.